Welcome back to the JPlay Play-Along of Sonic the Hedgehog 2, and if there's any one way to describe the way I play out the next few minutes, it is the word brain-dead. At any rate, welcome to Hilltop, where the sky looks happy, bright, and inviting, but is in fact a group of mountains filled with magma, otherwise known as volcanoes. You'll also notice we're above the clouds, where temperatures tend to be a lot lower than ground level. How is molten rock existing here? Those must be some really low clouds. I'm also wondering how the sky is so clear rather than filled with volcanic ash. It makes it look like a second Emerald Hill. I thought I would have looked a lot cooler grayed out, but oh well. The music doesn't help, it's in the same key and everything. I could have done with a couple of eruptions in Act 2, but oh well. Okay, so I did something interesting with Part 1. Only a handful of the very few viewers that I have at the moment are actually aware that I did the recording for that part about half a year ago at this point. Actually, over half a year ago. 2 months later, a friend of mine who goes by the handle of Usually Dead started a playthrough of Sonic 2 at his viewers' behest. Although I'm pretty sure it was more Mima than anyone else. He finished it, of course, albeit begrudgingly, and he said a couple of things that took my attention. Mainly the differences of this game and the ones he played as a child on the Super NES. So we discussed this on IRC, and he mostly wants to see my stance on the matter. Sad to say, I don't think it'll be a true debate between Genesis platforming and SNES platforming, because I also grew up with a latter console, with games like Super Mario World, F-Zero, Maximum Carnage, Killer Instinct, and Super Play Action Football. Not that it was my choice, because I was, what, 4? Anyway, this part of the JPlay will be my attempt, and I say attempt because I'm terrible at keeping my thoughts in order while debating. My attempt to counteract his arguments. Of course, this is his opinion, and I'm not going to shove mine down his throat just because it's different, and of course I'm still going to mention boss fights and new zones when they pop up. So, the first on his list of shortcomings is the loose controls. Dead grew up with platformers in which the main characters more or less stopped on a dime. Castlevania, Mega Man X, La Mulan, okay, maybe not that last one, but that's his preference. Sonic threw him for a loop, though, so to speak, because Sonic doesn't do that. His movement in many ways is based on the concept of momentum. Running up inclines and leaping over walls, jumping off of them in future titles, sudden bursts of speed starting with the Rush series. And since he goes so fast a majority of the time, platforming isn't easy, unless you slow down to a speed you're comfortable with. And Sonic's character, which is another thing that bothers Yudi, and which I find hilariously coincidental, by the way. He hates standing still. He can put up with it sometimes, like if he's talking to someone, but in any other case, it's just like, no, let me run. I'll talk to you later. And he'll have an attitude about it too, though he's gotten somewhat mellow as of recent. That's part of why the phrase gotta go fast caught on so well later on, even though that pretty much came directly from 4Kids. The way I see it, I think Yudi is too used to letting go of the directional buttons to come to a complete stop. And I'm not saying that's his fault, because that's likely how he was brought up on platformers, and maybe he thinks that it can be done no other way. But if you try that in any Sonic game, he's just going to keep on trucking, because Sonic Team tried something different and implemented Newton's first law. An object in motion stays in motion unless acted upon by an outside force, be it spikes, or badniks, or whatever. Supersonic Science Simulation! How's that for alliterative appeal? The closest any other platformer comes to this was Ice Levels. And everyone hates ice levels. The irony that Ice Cap is so popular, but I digress. What do I... Yeah, that's right. I lied. I jumped in this special stage coming up, and that must have slipped my mind. But that's alright, I'll just time skip, because that's not the focus of this JPlay, is it? Nah. Long story short, I got the Emerald, because it's still pretty simple. You'll notice that once you enter a special stage, the rings you've collected up to that point are forfeit. Which is bad. It's risky. But especially the checkpoint for each boss. It's probably the worst thing in this game, but then that's okay. There are usually rings hanging out around the area that reset after you've already picked them up. So that you're not all, where'd all my rings? How am I supposed to no damage this boss? So that boss encounter, the doctor got a little pod machine where he shoots tiny little fireballs at us. This ain't Mario. We ain't Goombas. And then he splashes lava on some of the platforms. It's a lot like the Marble Zone in Sonic 1. You can bounce on them repeatedly, but be careful you don't fall in lava like I did. So that's that for Hilltop. Not so exciting, but it's better than Casino Night by a long shot. And from the sky we head underground to Mystic Cave. Now this is a cool zone, as well as one of the average Sonic player's nightmares. because of that jump. You know which one. Actually, it's a series of jumps, but that's in Act 2, so we'll get to that when we do. So the next thing UD said was that the boss fights were annoying, and I can only agree with this on one point, and that's the Casino Night Zone boss fight, which I even trivialized in Part 1 anyway. If you're going to use the flippers and bumpers, you can do so, I'm not going to stop you. There's even the majority of Casino Night that serves as player training in terms of momentum control. Other than that, you have the strategy I used, the running up the walls trick. Either way, that boss fight demands a certain degree of knowledge about Sonic's movement. The only other boss I can think of that is kinda but not really bullcrap is the Wing Fortress boss, which is late game anyway. And platforming, which is Sonic 2 in and of itself. A platformer with an emphasis on momentum. Granted that momentum gets in the way during certain bosses, but you naturally learn as you play, oh okay, you're not supposed to do this to attack. Or, so that's his pattern, I see a blind spot that I can get in and hit without getting hit myself. This isn't solely about going fast, and it never was. Spin-offs aside, Sonic has always been a platformer more than anything else. Speed just happens to be one of his abilities, you don't have to use it. So next on the list we have inadequate player training. I think I might have already gone over this, but just in case I haven't, I'll use Mystic Cave as an example. Mystic Cave introduces the little levers you hold onto and a little bridge pops out. You use that to advance. It shows you that the bridges are one-time platforms that collapse like the cliffs in Green Hill. Shit, I'm sounding like Ego Raptor right now, aren't I? Anyway, once you learn about those two level gimmicks, you're introduced to both of them near the end of Act 2, with an incredibly harsh punishment. The infamous back-to-back-to-back spike pits that even Super Sonic can't get out of. Essentially, it's a very drawn-out insta-death if you fall in. Every zone has something like this. Not to the extent of Mystic Cave itself, otherwise it would be a real consideration for platformer hell. Speaking of platforms, what you want to do instead of just letting go of the D-pad or whatever, is to push in the opposite direction as you approach the next platform. This way you don't overshoot it, or skid off the side, and eventually you'll get a feel for it. There are some areas later in the game where you'll have to do this quickly, or the platform drops out from underneath you and you run in midair to your death, but it works! The best part? You don't even have to like it. Alright, so this cave, I'm not really seeing why it's called Mystic. I guess that's because of the moving boxes and the foliage that's able to crush you for some reason. But other than that, it just looks like some abandoned mine shaft, covered in moss or ivy or whatever that green stuff is. The fireflies you've seen me avoid for the most part are completely invulnerable while they're flashing. And the caterpillars play this game of I'ma bite you, and then I'm gonna hide. The zone itself is also one of the most saturated in terms of spikes, so expect to run into them eventually. Now the boss counter here is much like the one in Emerald Hill, only that the doctor is above you a majority of the time, ow my rings, and burrows into the roof. Other than that, he still rides forward and goddammit stop getting hit. He still has the little drills attached to his eggmobile, and the pattern is pretty much the same as it was last time. Just avoid the stalactites dropping down, there's a number of them. And that's a wrap for Mystic Cave. If you ever, and I know better than to think that this will actually happen, but if you ever want to experience this Genesis Sonic trilogy from this video with a clean slate, my suggestion is to start from the beginning rather than go backwards. Oil Ocean is an exaggeration of the oil spill scenario, which furthers the idea of the Doctor's twisted dream of a mechanical paradise. As such, some of the floors are slicked, meaning you'll lose control for a short bit as you're cascaded through parts of the level. The oil at the bottom has the odd property of acting as a liquid you can jump on over and over until you reach safe ground. It also doesn't stick to Tails' fur for some reason. Maybe he's non-stick by nature or something. Anyway, that isn't what makes this level memorable. Not to me. It's those goddamn seahorse badniks. I don't remember what their proper name is, but what I do remember is them floating in from the most uncomfortable angle and blasting poor little Tails to Kingdom Come. The other badniks are kinda eh, so it's really the seahorses that define this level. Now the last thing I wanted to go over was the non-linear level design and the character's abilities relative to that game. I'm gonna make one last comparison to other platformers I've played, namely Super Mario World, Kirby 64, and Spyro Year of the Dragon. Yes, I'm talking about other games in Sonic games, because we have to reference everything and everything. I thought we went over this! Okay, Mario World used momentum concepts too, though to a lesser degree. Once you had the cape, all you needed to do was find some place where you had sufficient running room, and for the most part you could just sail through the rest of the level unobstructed. The same went for Yoshi's eating feathers, or Blue Yoshi in general. You didn't have to, but you could. And even without the cape or Yoshi, Mario has always had this abnormally high jump arc, allowing him to platform with ease. Again, most of the time. By the time Kirby 64 rolled around, it was common knowledge that you could simply float over almost everything in previous Kirby games. You couldn't do that in Kirby 64 though. Not only did HAL nerf Kirby's multi-jump, they also limited the amount of times you could multi-jump before Kirby had to catch his breath and fall back down. This was a countermeasure they implemented to flying over everything, and this is one of those little touches that I liked about it. It was also a hint for some of the things you had to do in that game. For instance, in one level, there was a crystal shard so high up that Kirby couldn't float to it, but he had to use a combination ability to climb the wall next to it. I'm not gonna blame HAL for forcing me to stop inhaling enemies for a moment and think. A lot of early Kirby games averted this problem too, now that I think about it. Late game, there'd be some sort of tunnel chock full of Gordos, or with hazards on both sides that you'd have to navigate by floating. And in Year of the Dragon, or any Spyro game for that matter, pre-Dawn of the Dragon, or maybe... Did Shadow Legacy count? I don't think it did. Spyro also had platforming elements in those games too, but because the protagonist could glide and hover from the beginning of the game, the platforming was expanded, and the risk of falling into the abyss was usually much greater because of it. But it was alright, because you had abilities that suited the mood. So if you jumped the proper height and glided over the gap, then hover, you'd clear the jump no problem. Sheila the Kangaroo could jump super high, like way 2-3 times higher than Spyro, so the sub-levels with her in it were designed with that in mind. But Bentley the Yeti couldn't jump half as high as Spyro, so his levels were also... You see where I'm going with this, right? With this in mind, having abilities that you can use to solve problems and puzzles, if I could use momentum to my advantage and have the ability to run up walls and along ceilings and through corkscrews, personally, I wouldn't ever want to go in a straight line anymore if I could help it. That would be far too easy as a game. That would be the single most boring thing on the planet, even with enemies on the map. The only real exception I could think of is if I were competing for distance, like a game of Kitten Cannon, or Nanaka Crash, or something like that, where it doesn't really matter how far you go. Even the very first level in the series, Green Hill Zone Act 1, was multi-layered, and had all sorts of neat tricks and traps in it. And by traps, I don't mean the spike bug, no. But that in itself lends quite well to exploration, even, when you have things like extra lives lying around in hidden tunnels and floating islands. And that about ends my argument, which was about, what, 7-8 minutes in length? That took me roughly 3 days to conceptualize and double-check. Yeah, and now you see why I'm bad at debating. Or speaking in general. Nah, let's not go that far. Anyway, this is when you start to notice that the levels are getting longer and longer. I mean, the first act alone took me the better part of 3 minutes for me to finish, and things aren't looking so bright for Act 2 either. You can already tell I'm losing patience at this point by the number of mistakes that I'm making. The irony in me trying to rush through this game and it ends up taking me even longer than I had planned. Ha! And I die to the music. First death in the game to a seahorse. What did I tell you? What did I tell you? And I love how everything pauses immediately after you die. It's like, well, my job's done. Time to stand here and gloat. And all the other bandits are like, woo! Yeah, go seahorse number 62. You gonna get promoted for this. And then the fade to black. So I finally make that jump, and then the handy high-speed transport cannon system takes me the rest of the way to the boss area. And I gotta say, even though I hate the seahorses in this level, we're talking Satan Robotnik levels of hate here. This level is okay. It's got atmosphere, it's got platforming, it's got challenges. Now this boss is simple, and at the same time it's not so simple. Robotnik surfaces for a moment in a little silver sub, and he's open to attack, but then he dives down and won't be vulnerable again for some time. Everything else is indestructible until Robotnik is defeated. That's the claw missile thing and the laser. Be careful with the laser, it can shoot the floor and the shockwave will catch you off guard. And that will do it for this part of the JPlay play-along of Sonic 2. Be sure to come back for part 3 in about, I don't know, 3 months? Yeah, that sounds about right. Catch you guys next time!